In the 1980s, professional wrestling in America was a patchwork quilt of fiefdoms. It was a collection of regional territories, each with its own king, its own heroes, and its own unique flavor of combat. But a storm was gathering in the Northeast. Vincent Kennedy McMahon, armed with a revolutionary vision and his father's checkbook, was turning his World Wrestling Federation from a regional player into a global juggernaut. He was an empire builder, and the old territories, once proud and defiant, began to fall. Their banners were torn down, their champions absorbed or cast aside. The age of territories was ending. The age of sports entertainment was beginning. But there was one kingdom that refused to bend the knee, a land of tough men and even tougher stories. It wasn't the biggest, it wasn't the flashiest, but it just might have been the meanest. This is the story of Mid-South wrestling, the territory that stared down a giant, and how it was ultimately brought down not by a king from the north, but by a force of nature in a disastrous business deal that proved more fatal than any body slam. This is the real reason Vince McMahon couldn't kill Mid-South wrestling, and the story of what did. To understand the resilience of Mid-South wrestling, you first have to understand the man who forged it in his own image, Cowboy Bill Watts. Watts wasn't just a promoter. He was a former football player and a bruising behemoth of a wrestler himself. He was a man with little tolerance for nonsense and a profound belief in what professional wrestling should be. When he took over the old NWA Tri-State territory in 1979 and rebranded it, he didn't just buy a business, he established a philosophy. His kingdom spanned the blue-collar heartland of Louisiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Mississippi. This wasn't the glitz of New York or the sunshine of California. This was oil country, a land of hard work, straight talk, and very little patience for anything fake. Watts understood his audience because, in many ways, he was his audience. He believed they deserved a product as tough and as real as they were, and that became the bedrock of Mid-South: believability. While others were doing it, Bill Watts truly mastered the episodic style of television wrestling that's now the industry standard. Each week wasn't just a random collection of matches, it was a chapter in a larger story. Feuds had logical starting points, they escalated with violent intensity, and they ended in decisive, often brutal, blow-offs. In the world of Mid-South, actions had consequences. A fireball to the face wasn't just a spectacle, it was the start of a months-long war that would draw sellout crowds across the territory. Watts ran his promotion with a famous toughness, enforcing a strict code of conduct that is almost mythical today. Kayfabe, the idea that wrestling's fictional reality must be protected at all costs, was everything. He famously insisted on separate locker rooms for faces, heroes, and heels, villains, and forbade them from being seen together in public. To the fans in Shreveport, Tulsa, and New Orleans, these weren't just characters on a TV screen. They were rival gangs, warring factions whose hatred was real and whose battles felt legitimate. This philosophy created an incredibly loyal fan base. They weren't just consumers of a product, they felt like citizens of a nation. They were invested in the triumphs of their hero, the Junkyard Dog, and they seethed with genuine hatred for the treacherous Ted DiBiase. They believed in Mid-South because Bill Watts gave them every reason to. He built a fortress, not of stone and mortar, but of grit, logic, and a deep-seated regional pride. And it was this fortress that stood directly in the path of Vince McMahon's advancing army. As the 1980s rolled on, the wrestling map of America began to bleed. The vibrant colors of the territories faded into the singular bright yellow and red of the World Wrestling Federation. Vince McMahon's strategy was a shock and awe campaign. He offered a polished, family-friendly product built around the larger-than-life superhero Hulk Hogan. His vision was of rock stars and cartoon characters, a national marketing machine that could beam its spectacle into every home in the country. He raided the territories for their top talent, dangling the promise of bigger paydays and national television exposure. One by one, promotions that had stood for decades, often battling their own internal problems, buckled under the pressure. But when the wave crashed against the borders of Mid-South, it didn't find an easy conquest. Mid-South wrestling was insulated, not by size or money, but by its very identity. The fans in Watts' territory weren't clamoring for superheroes. They were cheering for fighters. Their hero, the Junkyard Dog, wasn't a real American. He was the undisputed king of the Superdome, a local legend whose connection with the Louisiana fanbase was visceral and profound. Their villains weren't cartoonish despots. They were men like Ted DiBiase, whose betrayal of his friend JYD was a deeply personal act of treachery that ignited one of the hottest and most profitable feuds in wrestling history. The creative contrast was stark. While the WWF was defined by a bodybuilder telling kids to say their prayers and eat their vitamins, Mid-South was presenting gritty, violent morality plays. It was a world of brawlers like Hacksaw Jim Duggan, legitimate tough guys like Dr. Death Steve Williams, and heated tag team rivalries like the Rock and Roll Express versus the Midnight Express that set arenas on fire. This wasn't a product that could be easily replaced. The WWF's brand of sports entertainment was seen by many in the South as foreign and inauthentic. Bill Watts had cultivated a palate for steak, and Vince McMahon was trying to sell them sizzle. It just didn't take. A critical part of this resistance was television. In March 1985, Mid-South secured a coveted TV spot on Ted Turner's superstation WTBS. This happened after the infamous Black Saturday, when Vince McMahon bought the Georgia Championship Wrestling time slot, filled it with a WWF highlight show that fans hated, and created a ratings disaster. Turner, flooded with angry calls, began looking for an alternative and found it in Watts' hard-hitting product. For a time, Mid-South Wrestling, a regional territory, was broadcast into homes all across America, giving it a reach few of its peers could match. For a moment, it seemed like Watts had built the perfect defense. He had a product that was culturally resonant, a roster his fans were personally invested in, and a national television platform. Mid-South wasn't beating the WWF in a national war, but in its own region, it was more than holding its own. It had dug in its heels, insulated by local loyalty and a style that was simply too real to be dismissed. Vince McMahon couldn't kill it with a simple head-on assault because Mid-South was fighting a different kind of war on its own home turf. But a fortress, no matter how strong, is only as stable as the ground it's built on, and the ground beneath Mid-South Wrestling was about to give way. The enemy that would ultimately cripple Bill Watts' empire wasn't a rival promoter from Connecticut. It was the invisible, implacable force of global economics. The real killer was the 1980s oil glut. To understand the catastrophic impact of this, you have to understand the prosperity that came before it. The Mid-South Territory, primarily Louisiana and Oklahoma, was the heart of America's oil industry. For years, high oil prices had fueled an economic boom. Money flowed freely, jobs were plentiful and high-paying. The blue-collar workers who filled the arenas on a Tuesday night in Shreveport had disposable income, and a night at the wrestling was a beloved form of entertainment. The roaring crowds of Mid-South's golden era were a direct reflection of a booming regional economy. Bill Watts had built his wrestling kingdom on a foundation of black gold. Then, in the mid-1980s, the bottom fell out. A global surplus caused the price of oil to collapse. In 1986, the price per barrel plummeted from over $27 to below $10. The effect on the region was an economic apocalypse. The oil and gas industry, which in 1982 provided 42% of certain state revenues in Louisiana, was suddenly in freefall. Companies went bankrupt, and mass layoffs swept across the territory. Louisiana alone lost 9% of its workforce, a devastating blow. For Mid-South wrestling, this economic devastation was a death blow. The fans didn't stop loving the Junkyard Dog or hating Skandor Akbar. They simply ran out of money. The choice between buying a wrestling ticket and putting food on the table isn't a choice at all. Bill Watts himself would later state in no uncertain terms that it wasn't Vince McMahon who beat him, it was the oil crunch. As he watched his once-packed arenas become dotted with empty seats, he saw the lifeblood of his business drain away. According to Watts' own recollections, he began losing as much as $50,000 a week. He was hemorrhaging money at an unsustainable rate. Mid-South Wrestling, for all its creative brilliance, was a business, and its customers were broke. Vince McMahon hadn't defeated Mid-South Wrestling. The cold, hard reality of economics had. The fortress was still standing, but the kingdom was starving. Trapped between a rival's expansion and a regional depression, Bill Watts did what he always did. He fought back. But this time, his counterattack would be a fatal miscalculation. Faced with a shrinking home base, he decided the only way to survive was to go national. In March 1986, Mid-South Wrestling was rebranded as the Universal Wrestling Federation, or UWF. The logic seemed sound. Mid-South screamed regional, and in the new landscape, that felt like a liability. Universal sounded grand, ready for a national push. Watts even bolstered his roster by bringing in talent from a fading world-class championship wrestling. For a brief moment, the UWF looked like a legitimate third player in the National Wrestling War, with a stacked roster featuring future legends like Sting. But the rebranding couldn't fix the two fundamental problems strangling the company. First, the oil crisis didn't care what the promotion was called. The fans were still broke. The second, and perhaps most devastating blow, came from television. Jim Crockett Jr., promoter of the Mid-Atlantic Territory and Vince's other major rival, also had national ambitions. A deal was brokered that gave Crockett Promotions control of the coveted Saturday wrestling time slots on WTBS. Just like that, the UWF was outmaneuvered and pushed off the national platform that had been so crucial to its visibility. The pressure became unbearable. With mounting weekly losses and his path to national TV blocked, Watts was out of options. A fateful move was made. The story goes that Jim Ross, then a key figure in the UWF office, reached out to Jim Crockett with a simple, stark message. Vince is about to buy Bill Watts. If he does, you're finished. Why don't you buy him instead? That was how Crockett came to the table. On April 9, 1987, the deal was done. Bill Watts sold the Universal Wrestling Federation, the kingdom that had defied a conqueror, to his rival, Jim Crockett Promotions. For Watts, it was a painful but necessary escape from financial ruin. For the UWF, its wrestlers, and its fans, it was the beginning of the end. They had survived the war with the North, only to be sold to an ally who would prove to be a more effective killer than any enemy. The sale to Jim Crockett Promotions should have been a lifeline. It should have created a consolidated super promotion, a true national challenger to Vince McMahon, combining the southern grit of the UWF with the prestige of the NWA. Instead, it became one of the great tragedies in wrestling history. The UWF wasn't merged, it was buried. Jim Crockett Promotions, led by their booker Dusty Rhodes, didn't see the UWF as an equal partner. They saw it as a conquered territory. Instead of weaving the UWF's red-hot storylines and popular champions into their own product, they treated them as second-class citizens. The UWF's top babyface, Dr. Death Steve Williams, was brought in only to be almost immediately beaten by one of Crockett's mid-card heels. The UWF champion Terry Gordy was booked to look inferior. The champions, rivalries, and stories that fans had invested in for years were systematically dismantled and made to look weak. It was a masterclass in how to kill a brand. The message sent to the audience was clear. The promotion you loved, the one that was so tough and so real, was inferior to the NWA. The UWF's identity, built on logic and credibility, was sacrificed at the altar of booking ego. The talent that Crockett acquired, a gold mine that included future megastars like Sting and the fabulous Freebirds, was largely squandered or presented as lesser than Crockett's established names. What Bill Watts had built through years of grit and passion, Jim Crockett Promotions disassembled in a matter of months. They hadn't just bought a company, they had bought their competition, and rather than integrating its strengths, they chose to publicly execute it. The ally had done what the enemy never could. He hadn't just defeated the kingdom, he had salted the earth where it stood, ensuring nothing from it could ever grow again. Vince McMahon couldn't kill Mid-South, but the men who were supposed to be its saviors were more than happy to arrange the funeral. So, what is the real reason Vince McMahon couldn't kill Mid-South Wrestling? He couldn't kill it because it was everything his promotion wasn't. Mid-South was grounded in a gritty reality that the cartoonish world of the WWF couldn't penetrate. It was built on a foundation of regional pride so strong that its fans viewed the invading federation as an unwelcome foreign entity. It was booked with a logical intensity that created a bond of belief with its audience, a bond that couldn't be broken by flashy production or cartoon characters. Mid-South was a fortress of credibility, and it held the line. But a fortress can't survive an earthquake. The 1980s oil crisis was an economic earthquake that ripped the financial heart out of the Mid-South territory. It wasn't a body slam that put Bill Watts down, it was a balance sheet drenched in red ink. This economic disaster, followed by the political loss of its national television platform, forced Watts into a corner. The final blow was not an attack, but a rescue that proved fatal. As we saw, the sale to Jim Crockett Promotions was an act of desperation that turned into a tragedy. What should have been the dawning of a new super promotion became a case study in how to destroy a valuable asset through ego and mismanagement. The UWF wasn't beaten in a war, it was cannibalized by the very ally who was meant to save it. The legacy of Mid-South Wrestling is a complex one. It's a testament to the power of believable, story-driven wrestling. But it is also a cautionary tale. A tale of how even the toughest, most authentic promotion can be brought to its knees, not by a rival's army, but by the ground crumbling beneath its feet and a final, fatal deal with a supposed friend. The story of Mid-South is the story of the territory that refused to die, right up until the moment it was sold for its own funeral. If you want to see more deep dives into the forgotten history of professional wrestling, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments which territory we should cover next. Was Mid-South the best booked territory of all time? Sound off below.